I never thought I'd question my marriage over something that wasn't cheating, money, or abuse, but this secret made all three feel irrelevant in ways I still don't know how to explain. My name is Charlotte Whitman, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had one of the safer versions of love. Not exciting, not dramatic. I'm 34, my husband Logan Whitman is 36. We've been together 8 years, married for 6 of them. We live in Madison, Wisconsin, in a quiet neighborhood. Joggers in the mornings, neighbors who smile but don't ask personal questions. No kids yet. Not because we didn't want them, we talked about it constantly, but because something always felt unfinished. We kept saying next year like it was a real plan instead of a stall tactic. Logan worked as a regional operations manager for a commercial facilities company. Basically, he oversaw maintenance contracts for office buildings and warehouses across multiple states. It was boring in the way that makes lies believable. Lots of site visits, lots of compliance checks, lots of reasons to be gone for a few days at a time. Travel came with the job. Not constantly, but enough that I stopped questioning it. Tuesdays to Friday, he'd say, already pulling his suitcase out of the closet. Back late, or don't wait up. I trusted it, completely. His stories were never impressive. No flashy dinners, no weird coworkers. No gaps that made me tilt my head. He talked about broken HVAC systems, delayed inspections, regional managers who couldn't answer emails on time. He showed me receipts when reimbursements took forever. His boss emailed him during trips, CCing half the company like people who weren't trying to hide anything. If Logan was cheating, he was either terrifyingly good at it, or I was willfully blind. But there was something I couldn't put my finger on. When Logan came home from trips, he didn't act guilty. He didn't overcompensate with affection. He didn't rush to shower or keep his phone face down. He just felt split. Like he'd been living in a different version of his life for a few days and hadn't fully stepped back into this one yet. He'd sit on the edge of the bed longer than usual, take a minute before answering simple questions, stare into space like his brain was still somewhere else. I noticed it. I filed it away. I didn't interrogate it. Marriage, I told myself, wasn't about interrogations. About a year before everything finally cracked open, I started noticing the money, not the kind of stuff people warn you about. No maxed out credit cards, no missing rent, no sudden lifestyle upgrades, just small things. A hotel charge in Des Moines, Iowa, when he'd told me he was overseeing a site visit in Omaha, Nebraska. A cash withdrawal in the middle of a weekday when Logan almost never carried cash. A savings account that appeared during a refinance appointment that I didn't recognize. When I asked, he explained it easily. Some of the sites book through third-party systems. That account's old. I used it before we were married. Probably a bank thing. I'll look into it. His answers weren't defensive. They weren't rushed. They were casual enough that pushing harder would have made me feel paranoid, so I didn't. I told myself this was trust. That healthy relationships didn't involve spreadsheets and cross-checking locations. That if I went digging, I'd be the one creating a problem where there wasn't one. Then last October, Logan left his tablet at home. It sounds stupid now, but at the time it felt like nothing. He was rushing out the door, late for a flight, already half gone mentally. I was working from the couch that day, laptop balanced on my knees, emails piling up. The tablet buzzed once, then again, then again. I picked it up just to silence it. I wasn't snooping. I didn't even unlock anything. The notifications were already there, calendar reminders, not meetings, not work deadlines. Things like Salpa, school pickup, 3:15. Pediatrician appointment, 9 a.m., tuition payment due. I remember staring at the screen longer than I should have. Like if I waited long enough, the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. We didn't have kids. No nieces or nephews nearby. No godchildren. No regular responsibility that involved school schedules or pediatricians. I started making excuses in my head immediately. Maybe he was helping a coworker. Maybe it was a family friend. Maybe it was some temporary favor. But the reminders weren't labeled with names. Just tasks. Normal ones. Intimate ones. The kind you don't manage unless they belong to your life. When Logan came home that night, everything looked normal. He kissed my cheek, dropped his bag by the door, asked what I wanted for dinner. I didn't answer right away. I asked him, very calmly, if he was cheating on me. He looked confused first, then offended, then finally exhausted. No, he said. Not defensive, not emotional, just flat. So I told him about the tablet, about the reminders, about the things that didn't belong to us. I asked him what they were for. He didn't answer immediately. He sat down at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the wood, and put his head in his hands like someone bracing for impact. After a long moment, he said quietly, "I was hoping I'd have more time before this came out. And in that moment, I knew my marriage was about to split into a before and an after. And I didn't yet understand what I was going to lose in the process. Logan didn't look at me when he said it. I was hoping I'd have more time before this came out. That sentence sat between us like a physical object. Heavy, sharp around the edges. The kind of thing you don't say unless whatever comes next is irreversible. I remember standing there in our kitchen, one hand still wrapped around my phone, the other pressed flat against the counter, like I needed something solid to keep me upright. The house felt too quiet. Even the hum of the fridge felt loud. More time for what? I asked. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for years and was finally giving up on that strategy. He rubbed his hands together, not nervously exactly, but like someone trying to warm them after being outside too long. To figure out how to tell you, he said. I asked again if he was cheating. I needed to hear the answer twice, like repetition might make it stick. No, he said. I swear, this isn't that. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because now my imagination had space to roam. I sat down across from him. My legs felt unsteady, and I didn't trust myself to stand without shaking. The table between us suddenly felt too big, like we were already on opposite sides of something. Then talk, I said, because I'm running out of ways to explain this to myself. He nodded slowly, like he was agreeing to something he didn't want to do but knew he had to. There's no good way to start this, he said, so I'm just going to say it. He paused, and then finally said, I have a child. The words didn't land all at once. They came apart in my head, like my brain was refusing to assemble them into meaning. I started, then stopped. You have… what? A kid, he said quietly. A son. I stared at him. I'm not proud of how long I stared. It must have been uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop. I was searching his face for something. A smile, a crack, a sign this was some kind of awful joke. There wasn't one. How? I said finally, because it was the only word I could reach. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Before we met, he said. A few years before. I shook my head immediately, not in disagreement, in refusal. No, I said. No, that's not… You would have told me. You would have had to. I know, he said. I should have. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He started talking, and I barely interrupted him, partly because I was afraid if I did, I wouldn't be able to stop. In his mid-20s, before me, before Madison, before the version of his life I knew, he'd dated someone briefly. It hadn't been serious. It hadn't lasted long. They broke things off, messy but final. A few months later, she told him she was pregnant. She didn't want a relationship, he said. She was clear about that. She didn't even want me around at first. She just wanted help. He told me he panicked. He was broke, living with roommates, working contract jobs, barely keeping himself afloat. His parents told him not to derail his life over one mistake. Those were his words. He didn't defend them. He just repeated them. So what did you do? I asked. I paid support, he said. Quietly, no courts, no paperwork at first, just responsibility. I felt something twist in my chest at that word. When we met, his son was already a toddler. He didn't tell me then, or the next year, or the year after that. I kept thinking I'd find the right moment, he said. And then the right moment passed, and then it felt like telling you would destroy something good. So instead, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, you just didn't? He nodded. That's when he told me about the trips. The travel was real. He wasn't lying about being gone. He just wasn't going where he said he was going. Sometimes he really did have site visits. Other times, he'd book time off around them. He'd fly out, rent a car, and drive to see his son in another state. He'd stay in hotels nearby, go to school events, doctor appointments, birthday dinners. The reminders on the tablet were his way of not forgetting anything, of keeping track, of being present. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I asked questions in a voice that didn't feel like mine. Does he know about me? Yes, Logan said. He knows I'm married. He's seen pictures. That hit harder than I expected. What am I to him? I asked. Logan swallowed. You're my wife, the one who lives far away. I felt stupid for how much that hurt. Does his mother know about me? I asked. Yes, he said again. She always has. Did she ever think this was wrong? I asked. He hesitated. She didn't care, as long as I showed up, as long as I helped. That's when something in me cracked open. So everyone knew, I said, except me. Logan flinched. It wasn't like that. It is exactly like that, I said. You had a whole life I wasn't allowed to see. He reached across the table, like he wanted to touch my hand. I pulled back before he could. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you, he said. I thought if I could just be a good husband first. Stable, reliable. Then one day I could explain it in a way that didn't blow everything up. And if I said no, I asked? If I said I didn't want this? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, I didn't let myself think about that. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I asked him if he ever planned to tell me. Yes, he said quickly. I thought maybe after we had kids of our own, so it wouldn't feel like you were competing. That was the moment I had to stand up. I pushed my chair back hard enough that it scraped the floor. The sound felt too loud, too final. So you decided when I was allowed to know, I said. You decided what version of my life I got to consent to. That's not, he started. That's exactly what it is, I said. He didn't argue. We sat there for a long time after that. No shouting, no crying. Just the quiet devastation of something you can't put back where it came from. Logan kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't abandon him. And he was right, but he abandoned the truth. By the time we went to bed, nothing felt settled. I slept in the guest room. He stayed in our bedroom, door open, like that meant something. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every year of our relationship in my head, wondering what else had been shaped by a lie I didn't even know to look for. And for the first time since we met, I couldn't tell if staying made me loyal or complicit. The days after Logan told me felt unreal, like I was moving through a version of my life that looked familiar but no longer followed the same rules. We didn't tell anyone right away. Not my family, not his, not friends. It sat between us like a third presence, quiet but impossible to ignore. Every conversation felt like it had a footnote I couldn't stop reading. Logan gave me space, or at least his version of it. He slept in the bedroom. I stayed in the guest room. We passed each other in the kitchen like polite strangers who shared a lease. I thought the shock would fade first. That anger would rush in and take over. Instead, what came was something harder to sit with: reinterpretation. Every memory I'd ever had with him started replaying itself with new context, like a movie I'd already seen once but couldn't stop watching again. The early years were the worst. When Logan and I first started dating, he traveled less. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. Now I could see the pattern more clearly, the trips that always seemed to fall around the same times of year. The ones he scheduled carefully, far in advance, and treated as non-negotiable. I remembered the first time I'd asked, half joking, "Do you have a secret family or something?" He'd laughed, kissed my forehead, said, "If I did, you'd know." That memory hurt more than the confession itself. I remembered holidays he couldn't make because of work emergencies. A Thanksgiving when I ate reheated leftovers alone because he'd been called out of town at the last minute. A 4th of July he missed, texting me a picture of fireworks from somewhere that definitely wasn't Wisconsin. At the time, I'd told myself that was adulthood, that relationships involved compromise, that jobs demanded sacrifice. Now I wondered whose holidays he had been attending instead. I didn't ask him right away. I wasn't ready for the answers yet. Instead, I started noticing the careful way he'd always kept certain parts of his life separate. He never connected his personal calendar to mine. He never synced devices. He handled travel bookings himself, even when it would have been easier to loop me in. He insisted on paying for certain things alone, out of his money, even after we combined finances. At the time, I thought it was independence. Now I knew it was containment. The worst part was realizing how good he'd been at it. Not in a manipulative mastermind way. In a slow, practical, almost boring way. He'd built a system that allowed him to be present in 2 lives without letting them touch. And that realization brought something else with it: guilt. Because the more I thought about it, the more I saw the version of Logan who showed up for his son. The reminders, the appointments, the consistent presence. He hadn't disappeared. He hadn't vanished for years at a time. He'd been there, just not honestly. And that made my anger feel complicated. I finally asked him where his son lived. He told me a mid-sized city in another state, not close enough for casual visits, not far enough to excuse total secrecy. He showed me pictures when I asked. School photos, awkward smiles, missing front teeth, a face that looked enough like Logan to make my stomach drop. I didn't know how to react. I didn't want to reject a kid I'd never met. I didn't want to accept a reality I'd never chosen. I asked Logan if he'd ever considered telling me before we got engaged. Yes, he said, all the time. So why didn't you? Because every time I imagined it, he said, I imagined you leaving. That answer made me feel both powerful and disposable at the same time. I asked if he'd told anyone else, friends, coworkers, family. Just my parents, he said. And his mom, obviously. That one stung more than I expected. Your parents knew, I thought. Mine didn't. They celebrated our engagement, our wedding, every anniversary, all without knowing what I was marrying into. I started wondering how many decisions I'd made without full information. The apartment we chose because it fit our budget. Would I have wanted something bigger if I knew a child was already part of his life? The way we talked about timelines for kids. Was I negotiating with a future that had already started somewhere else? Logan told me he never spent our joint money on his son, that everything came from separate accounts, that he'd gone out of his way to protect me from the financial impact. But protection without permission felt like control. One night, after dinner, he asked me if I wanted to meet him, his son. The way he asked was careful, too careful. Like he already knew the answer might be no. I told him I didn't know. That answer became my default. I didn't know if I could sit across from a child who had been real in my husband's life longer than I had. I didn't know if I could smile and pretend this wasn't built on a lie. I didn't know if I could step into a role I never agreed to audition for. At the same time, I didn't know if refusing would make me the villain in a story I never asked to be part of. Logan started talking about the future like it was something we could still plan. He said he wanted to stop hiding, that his son was getting older, that questions were coming, that secrets like this didn't age well. I didn't argue with that. I just wondered why the weight of that realization had landed on me instead of him. The more days passed, the more I felt like I was living in a marriage that had quietly changed genres without telling me. It wasn't a betrayal story in the way people expect. There was no other woman in his bed, no stolen text messages, no dramatic reveal of infidelity. There was just a long-term lie that had shaped my life without my consent. And I couldn't decide which was worse. Because some nights, when I watched Logan sit alone at the table, head in his hands, clearly terrified of losing everything, I felt sympathy. And other nights, I felt like a supporting character in a story that had never centered me to begin with. I still hadn't told anyone, but the silence was starting to feel heavier than the secret itself. The first person I told wasn't planned. It wasn't a dramatic decision or a moment of clarity. It was exhaustion. I was sitting across from my older sister, Hannah, in a crowded coffee shop on the east side of Madison, half listening to her complain about a coworker I didn't care about, nodding automatically, waiting for my latte to cool. She stopped mid-sentence and asked, "What's wrong with you?" I shrugged. I tried to smile. I failed. "I think my marriage might be over," I said too quickly, like if I slowed down I'd lose the nerve. She froze. "What?" I stared into my cup. "Logan has a kid." The silence that followed felt louder than the espresso machine. "He what?" she asked. I told her everything, not cleanly, not in order, just pieces spilling out as I talked. The trips, the tablet, the confession, the years of silence. Hannah listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finally ran out of words, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "That's not okay," she said immediately. Something in my chest loosened. "Even if he didn't cheat?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Especially if he didn't cheat. That means he had years to tell you and chose not to." I nodded. I felt validated and somehow worse at the same time. "He took your choice," she continued. "He decided what kind of life you were allowed to consent to." That phrase stuck with me. Consent, choice, agency. When I told Logan I'd talked to Hannah, he didn't get angry. He just looked resigned. "I figured you'd need someone," he said. I asked him who he'd talked to. "No one," he said. "I don't think I get to complain about this." That made me angrier than if he'd defended himself. A few days later, I told my best friend Megan. We'd known each other since college. She'd been in the front row at my wedding. She knew Logan well, trusted him. Her reaction surprised me. "At least he did the right thing by his kid," she said after I finished. "A lot of men don't." I stared at her. "That's it?" "I mean," she said carefully, "yeah, he lied. That's bad, but he didn't abandon a child. That counts for something." I went home that night feeling more confused than before. The reactions split my world cleanly in two. People who saw Logan as a decent man trapped by bad decisions, and people who saw him as someone who had quietly manipulated my entire life. Both were right, and neither helped me decide what to do. Logan finally told his parents we were struggling. They called me the next day. His mother cried, told me she loved me, said she understood if I needed time. His father kept repeating that Logan had always tried to do the responsible thing. I wanted to ask them if they understood what it felt like to be the only adult in the room who hadn't been given all the information. I didn't. My parents were worse. They were shocked, hurt, angry in a way that felt protective and suffocating at the same time. My mom asked me why I hadn't known. My dad asked why I was still in the house. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted me to choose a side. And Logan stayed quiet through most of it. He didn't argue when people criticized him. He didn't defend himself loudly. He just kept saying the same thing. "I understand if she leaves." That sentence stopped feeling noble after a while. It started feeling like pressure, like he was placing the weight of the decision entirely on me while absolving himself of the consequences. The first real fracture happened a week later. Logan told me his son's mother wanted to meet me, Not casually, not someday. Soon. She says it's better if we're all on the same page, he said. I felt my chest tighten. All? You, he said carefully. Me, her. I asked him why now. She knows you know, he said. And she doesn't want this to stay secret anymore. That word again, secret. I asked him if he wanted me to meet his son. Yes, he said, eventually. And if I say no, I asked? He hesitated, just for a second. I don't know how long I can keep living like this, he said. That felt like an ultimatum, even if he didn't mean it that way. That night, lying in the guest room, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about whether I could forgive a lie. It was about whether I was willing to step into a role I never agreed to play for the rest of my life. And for the first time, I wondered if love was enough to bridge that gap. Or if staying would mean erasing myself quietly, the same way the truth had been erased from my marriage. Up until that point, everything had lived in my head. Anger, sympathy, betrayal, confusion. All of it was abstract enough that I could move through my days without making a real decision. I could tell myself I just needed time, that things would become clearer if I waited. That illusion ended the day Logan asked me to come with him. He didn't say it outright at first. He just mentioned he had a trip coming up, a short one, 2 nights. I nodded automatically, already halfway checked out. Then he said, I was thinking, maybe you could come with me this time. I looked up. Why? He swallowed. Because she wants to meet you, and because I don't want to keep splitting my life in half. There it was. Not an ultimatum, but close enough to feel like one. I told him I needed time to think. He said he understood, but the tension stayed in the air, thick and unresolved. For the first time since he told me the truth, I started imagining the logistics instead of the emotions. What would it look like to sit across from the woman who had known about me for years, without ever feeling the need to tell me the truth? What would it feel like to see a child who had been real in my husband's life long before I was? What words would I even use? Hi, I'm your dad's wife, the one he lied to. I didn't sleep much that week. Every night, my thoughts circled the same question from different angles. Was I being asked to forgive or to absorb? Because forgiveness felt finite. Something you do, something you work through. Absorbing felt endless. I started noticing how the pressure was shifting. Logan wasn't asking me if I wanted this life. He was asking me how quickly I could adapt to it. He talked about practical things, schedules, visits, transparency, how things could be normal if we just stopped hiding. But normal for who? One night, I asked him something I'd been avoiding. If I'd known from the beginning, I said, do you think I still would have married you? He didn't answer right away. And that was answer enough. I don't know, he said finally. But I hoped you would. That hurt in a quiet, specific way. Hope is not consent. The breaking point came a few days later over something small. Logan was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't even curious in the same way anymore. But the screen lit up with a message preview, a picture, a child's drawing, stick figures, a sun in the corner, 3 people holding hands. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. When Logan came out, towel around his waist, humming like nothing was wrong, something in me snapped. I can't do this, I said. He froze. Do what? Pretend this is something I can just grow into, I said. Pretend I'm catching up instead of being dragged. He looked genuinely scared then. I'm not asking you to pretend. Yes, you are, I said. You're asking me to skip past the part where I get to decide. He sat down hard on the edge of the bed. I didn't want to lose either of you, he said. And I didn't want to be lied to, I said. But here we are. He asked me again if I would meet them, just once. No pressure beyond that. Just a conversation. I told him I didn't know if meeting his son would make things better or impossible to undo. Because once a child has a face, walking away doesn't feel like leaving a marriage anymore. It feels like abandoning a person, and that terrified me. I asked him something I hadn't let myself say out loud until then. If I say I can't do this, I said, what happens? He looked down at his hands. I don't know, he said. I don't think I can keep living in pieces. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave forever, not to make a statement, just to breathe without the weight of a decision pressing into my chest every second. I went to Hannah's place, slept on her couch, stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside. For the first time since the truth came out, I wasn't surrounded by Logan's fear or hope or expectations, just my own, and what I realized scared me more than anything else. I didn't know if staying would destroy me slowly, or if leaving would haunt me for the rest of my life. Staying at Hannah's place felt like pressing pause on my life, but the world didn't actually stop. Logan texted, but not obsessively, short check-ins. Are you okay? Let me know if you want to talk. No pressure, which somehow felt worse, like he was waiting for a verdict. I didn't respond right away. I needed to hear my own thoughts without them bouncing off his. Hannah didn't push me either. She brought me coffee in the mornings, sat next to me on the couch at night while we watched shows neither of us cared about. Let the silence do its work. A few days in, she asked me something that cut through everything else. If he had told you before the wedding, she said, what would you have done? I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know, I said finally. And that terrified me, because if the answer had been a clear no, this would be easier, painful but clean. But the truth was messier. I might have stayed. I might have asked for time, boundaries, counseling, space to decide. But I would have had a choice. That was the piece I couldn't let go of. Logan hadn't just hidden a fact. He'd decided the outcome for me. He'd built a marriage around an assumption he never confirmed. When I finally agreed to meet him again, it wasn't to reconcile. It was to talk without walls between us. We met at a quiet park near Lake Mendota, neutral ground, public but not crowded. The kind of place where conversations can happen without becoming scenes. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago, like the weight of honesty was heavier than the weight of lying ever had been. We walked for a while before either of us spoke. I don't want to force you into anything, he said eventually. I know, I said, but that doesn't undo what already happened. He stopped walking, turned to me. I love you, he said. That part wasn't a lie. I know, I said, and I meant it. That's what makes this so hard. I asked him something I'd been circling for days. If your son had never existed, I said, would you have told me? He didn't answer immediately. I don't know, he said finally. I want to say yes, but I can't promise that. That honesty hurt more than anything else he'd said so far, because it meant the problem wasn't just the secret. It was the pattern, avoid, delay, hope things work out on their own. I told him I was afraid, not of his son, not even of the future itself. I was afraid that staying meant agreeing that my needs would always come second to something already in motion, that I would always be adapting to a life built without my input. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. I don't want you to disappear in this, he said quietly. But I already did, I said, for years. I just didn't know it yet. We sat on a bench overlooking the water. Ducks moved lazily across the surface, life going on like nothing had changed. I asked him if he could live without me. He said he didn't want to find out. I asked him if he could live without his son. He didn't answer, and I didn't expect him to. That was the moment I realized there was no version of this where everyone walked away whole. Only versions where someone absorbed the damage quietly. When we stood to leave, he asked me one last question. Do you think you could ever forgive me? I thought about forgiveness as a word, how often it gets confused with acceptance, with forgetting, with moving on. I don't know, I said, and I don't know how long it would take to find out. He nodded, like that was the most he'd expected. We hugged, briefly, carefully, like people who weren't sure what they were allowed to be to each other anymore. I went back to Hannah's that night with more clarity than I'd had before, and less certainty, because now the question wasn't whether Logan was a good man or a bad one. It was whether love was enough to make a life built on a lie feel like one I could still step into, willingly. And I still didn't know the answer. I moved back home 2 weeks later, not because everything was fixed, not because I'd forgiven him, mostly because living out of a bag made everything feel temporary in a way that wasn't helping me think. Logan didn't celebrate when I came back. He didn't act relieved. He just made space for me, the same careful way you make space for something fragile that might still leave. We existed in a strange truce. We talked more honestly than we ever had before, but less often. Conversations felt deliberate, measured, like we were both aware that every word might tip the balance in one direction or the other. Logan stopped traveling as much, or at least he stopped lying about where he was going. When he went to see his son, he said so plainly, no euphemisms, no cover stories. I didn't go with him. Not because I'd decided never to, but because once I crossed that line, I wasn't sure I could uncross it. Some nights, I lay awake in our bed listening to his breathing, wondering how many versions of him I'd loved without realizing it. Wondering if knowing everything now made our marriage more real, or finally exposed how uneven it had always been. Friends kept asking what we'd decided. Family wanted timelines. Logan wanted reassurance I couldn't give. And I felt like the only honest thing I could say was, I'm still here, which felt both hopeful and meaningless at the same time. The hardest part wasn't the jealousy anymore. It was the grief. Grief for the version of my life I thought I was building. Grief for the certainty I used to have. Grief for the idea that love alone could be enough if two people just wanted it badly enough. I thought about the child sometimes, about what it would mean to be in his life. about the kind of person I'd have to become to do that without resentment. I thought about leaving too, about starting over with someone who didn't come with a history that had been hidden from me, about whether that would actually feel freer or just different. Logan never pressured me to decide, but the waiting became its own kind of pressure. Some days I imagined staying, therapy, transparency, building something honest out of the mess. Other days I imagined walking away before I disappeared completely into a life I hadn't chosen. Both futures scared me. And maybe that's the part no one wants to talk about, that sometimes the most painful situations aren't about right or wrong. They're about whether you can live with the cost of either choice. I still don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if staying means I'm strong, or just afraid to leave. I don't know if leaving means I'm protecting myself, or running from something complicated but real. All I know is that my husband's secret didn't end our marriage in one dramatic moment. It changed it slowly, quietly, and maybe permanently. And I'm still standing in the middle of it, trying to decide which version of my life I can live with. So I guess I'll ask the people who don't know me, because the ones who do all seem too sure of themselves. Is a lie that long something you learn to live with, or something that eventually makes the choice for you?